Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today my group and I we will present our topic, which is British and Malay Sultanates. So I will explain on the curtailment of Bugis power. First of all, talking about the coming of Bugis to Malay archipelago, where before the Malaya became as an independent nation, the Bugis tribe migrated here from the Indonesian archipelago of Sulawesi. So it became as one of the first tribes to arrive and settle in Malaya, which remain here, build family structures, and also generate the descendants and successors right up to the present. So the Bugis had a long history of commercial links with the kingdoms of Malacca and Aceh, partially due to their reputation as business and good in politics, skills in wars. So they are starting create a new village in Malacca Strait, including Selangor River, Klang River, and also in Lingi. However, there are a few causes why the Bugis leave their native nation, such as due to the unpredictable political climate in their home country. So this is due to the fact that prior to the Dutch entering the interior of the Bugis land, those regions had been in a state of chaos and had no security in their places of residence. So it made it impossible for them to carry out the majority of their economic activities. And plus, among of the Bugis nobles, there were frequently disputes between them because each of them believed that themselves to be more entitled to rule as a ruler. And then what happened is this sort of circumstance lead to the extensive carnage, civil wars, and also wars across the areas. And monopolistic policy of the European and Dutch powers on the commercial activity of the Bugis people, such as a spice trade between the Makassar, the largest port on South Sulawesi Island, and the Maluku Island, which borders Sulawesi Island to the west, that destroyed the carriers of the majority of the Bugis traders, who had forced them to leave their hometowns and sail to others. And hence, the number of Bugis people that living in Malay archipelago continue to rise. And then Bugis influence in Malay archipelago continues to strengthen due to their expertise in navigation, agriculture, commerce, and also take control of the region's political and economic sectors. And for 30 years, their effort paid off as they strengthened their position in the trade, particularly in Klang and also Lingi, and rise power. They are becoming rulers of that places. And furthermore, Daeng Marewang be as a Raja Muda Johor and allow the Bugis authority to expand to the trading regions of Kedah and also Perak. This is because the Bugis traders started to settle in Johor, even though their influence there was not as strong as it was in Selangor, but by 18th century. Then in Selangor, Raja Lumu be as a first Sultan Selangor with the title of Sultan Saharudin Shah, which is thought to have strengthened the development of Bugis politics in Selangor. And Raja Lumu enhanced his status as a sultan as a result of winning of the approval of Sultan Perak, who is descendants of from the Malacca Sultanate. However, just as their dominance peaked, the colonial era started had a significant impact on them as their power became weak and also disappeared. Then we will go to the point of the colonizations after effect of Bugis power, where the first, the Dutch taking action to monopolize all the trade in Malacca Straits by requiring all the ships passing through the Malacca to obtain a passage later from the Dutch side. They were feel challenged in regards to the appearance of the Bugis that will be very influential in the Malay world, both politically and economically. So June 1784, there was a war when the Johor army under Raja Haji and Sultan of Selangor, Sultan Ibrahim, fought the Dutch in Malacca, and this incident resulted to the Raja Haji's passing on June 18 in Teluk Ketapang. So due to the dispute and war that occurred, the correspondence and also the mutual sendings of the messengers took place several times to establish a peace agreement. But the trial came to the end, and when the Van Braam announced the term of his agreement to two Johor officials, which is Ahmad Raja and Setia Raja, as he stated that the contract between the Malays and the Bugis should be terminated. The Bugis are prohibited from becoming a Raja Muda Johor again, and also all the Bugis must leave Riau. And then, despite the fact that the Bugis lacked the Dutch levels of weaponry, war broke out, especially among the Bugis and Dutch. However, when the Sultan Mahmud surrendered on November 10, 1784, the Dutch and Sultan Mahmud signed an agreement in which, among other things, Sultan Mahmud and also his officials acknowledged that the Dutch had taken control of Riau and its port. The kingdom of the Johor was still free to be ruled by Malay power, but under the control and the command of the Dutch, with a certain restrictions. And all the agreements that had been made between the Johor Malay and Bugis officials were immediately null, and the Bugis people were also no longer entitled to hold any position in the administration. Lastly, the Bugis power became weak due to the Anglo-Dutch Agreement of 1824 that was signed as a result of the British colonial era. So this agreement was reached following negotiations between the British and also Dutch regarding the division of their respective possessions in the Malay archipelago, which were carried out to address the issue of the competition between the British and also Dutch in Singapore. And therefore, as a result of this settlement, the British will hold the power over the Malay Peninsula, while the Dutch will hold the control over Java Island, where this agreement is perceived as the dividing line between the Malays. So in other words, it can be said that the trading relationship between the Bugis and the states in the Malay archipelago, such as Selangor, that was previously quite good, were also separated, and therefore it can be seen that the aftermath of the colonizations bring to the curtailment of Bugis power, that who was at one time in the past in the Malay archipelago exceedingly powerful and also prominent.
Next is the declaration of Johor Sultanate. Johor has been reformed after the Portuguese regained power in Malacca, and also because the last Sultan has been killed, and it led by the Bendahara family, which is Sultan Abdul Jalil Riayat Shah IV. Why? Is because the last descendant of Malacca Sultanate was killed without heir, and because of that, the former Bendahara has been followed the lineage and reformed the new Sultanate. And in 1960, the capital was established in Batu Siwa and become an entrepôt for Johor Sultanate. And because of the outbreak of war and the long war with the Jambi, Batu Siwa has been struck in 1973. And because of that, Sultan has sailed to Bintan and established a new capital there, which it became Johor ruled 4 different states or capital, which is Pahang, Siak or Riau, Indragiri and Sumatra. Next is the story of Bendahara family. As I mentioned before, the last Sultan has been killed and it been led by Bendahara family. The last Sultan, Sultan Mahmud, lived with no heir to continue the throne. Therefore, it led to the new lineage, which is the Bendahara lineage, where the former Bendahara from Malacca Sultanate, Tun Abdul Jalil, regained and reformed the Johor Sultanate and become the new line up to become a sultan. And he changed his name to Sultan Abdul Jalil Riayat Shah IV. However, during 1717, there is the invention of Johor by Siak, where Raja Kecil proclaimed that he is the last heir of the Malacca Sultanate with the Queen of Siak. And because of that, he tried to regain back the lineage of Malacca Sultanate, which is right now is Johor Sultanate. And when Raja Kecil regained the power, he changed his name to Sultan Abdul Jalil Rahmat Shah. And there is a lot of hostilities that regained because of Raja Kecil take the throne. The first is from Malay, because of the killing of Bendahara, which is has been done by Raja Kecil to regain the throne. And the second is Bugis, because he broke the promise to share power and conflict with the Imprani and the Inchelab, which is I will explain later. Next is the story of why Raja Kecil's power has been declined. It is because of the story of between Raja Kecil and Bugis that I mentioned before, where the hostilities of the Bugis because of the break of promise. At first, Raja Kecil has been asked for help from Daeng to gather support against the Bendahara's family. As I mentioned before, that Raja Kecil was the last heir of the claim that he was the last heir of Sultan. However, in the end, Raja Kecil turned down the promise, which is led to the outrage of Bugis because of the promises has been break, and also the protection has been given has been rejected, and so on. And due to that, the Imprani put the intention to drive Raja Kecil out of the Johor. And how the Imprani drive out the Raja Kecil of the Johor? He used the agreement of Raja Sulaiman, which is the heir of Sultan Abdul Jalil Riayat Shah, the son of former Bendahara. So he used the outrage and also revenge by Raja Sulaiman to drive off Raja Kecil after Johor. It is successful, and it helped to restore back the Bendahara lineage. And as a reward, Raja Sulaiman appointed Bugis chief, which is called as Yang Tuan Muda, and it led to intermarriage between Bugis chief with member of Johor families. However, in the long term effect, Bugis started to dominate Johor Sultanate, and 19th century, Johor tried to rid off Bugis with help of Dutch. However, it is unsuccessful, and Bugis remained influence in Johor.
The establishment of Penang. Penang was originally part of the Malay Sultanate of Kedah. The struggle started for the throne took place among the dignitaries in Kedah. Sultan Muhammad Jiwa of Kedah appointed Tunku Abdullah to be the Viceroy of Kedah. However, the appointment was not approved by the king's relative because Tunku Abdullah was not a Gahara child. In 1771, Bugis invasion of Kedah overpayment for their previous service in 1724 until 1726 were led by the Raja Haji. Sultan Muhammad Jiwa of Kedah took refuge in Perlistan and asked for help from the firm of Jordan Sullivan and de Souza to fight the Bugis. In 1771, the Sultan of Kedah offered share in trade and trade settlement on the bank of Kedah River to Francis Light in exchange for military protection from the Siamese and Burmese armies who were threatening Kedah at that time. Sultan Abdullah ruled in Kedah enjoyed lack of support from other Kedah princes and faced Siamese threat. Siam claimed to suzerainty over Kedah and demanded that Kedah to send gold flowers as a sign of patronage. Sultan Abdullah wanted foreign help to secure his positions. At the same time, Francis Light had persuaded the Sultan of Kedah to cede Penang to the British East Indian Company in exchange for military protection from the Siamese and Burmese armies. Then Sultan Abdullah offered Penang to the British East Indian Company. Francis Light recognized how important of Penang as a port. However, at the same time, British also needed to maintain their interests with Siam. In 1786, an agreement was signed personally between Francis Light and Sultan Abdullah. In the agreement, Kedah was allowed British East Indian Company to occupy Pulau Pinang at that time. On 11 August 1786, Captain Francis Light was landed in Penang. Francis Light established a British settlement in Penang and raised the Union Jack flag. Then, he renamed the island as Prince of Wales Island and Newport Georgetown in honor of the heir of the British throne. Then, Francis Light be the first superintendent of Penang. In 1790, Siam occupied Patani and threatened Kedah. Kedah wanted British military protection for against increasing Siamese threat. However, Sultan Abdullah of Kedah heard that the British would not give protections. Then, he formed an army to get rid of the Dutch and the English. He assembled his men at Seberang Perai to retake the island of Penang, but was defeated. Then, Captain Francis Light had carried night raids on the enemy's fortress. In 1791, Sultan Abdullah signed a treaty with the British handing over Penang Island to the British. Then, Francis Light also promised to pay the Sultan of Kedah 6,000 Spanish dollars annually. In 1800, Lieutenant Governor of Penang, Sir George Lead, negotiated with Kedah for the cession of a strip of Mainland Kedah and renamed it as Province Wesley. To encourage settlers, the port was accorded a duty-free status and new arrivals were allowed to claim as much land as they could clear. From virtually an uninhabited island, the population grew to 10,000 by the end of the century. Penang became a trading post for tea, spices from China, and paper from Aceh, and textile from India. Later on, the regional trade grew to include tin, then rubber. In 1805, Penang Presidency, headed by a governor, was Philip Dundas. By 1812, plan of Naval Base at Penang was abandoned by the British. By late 18th century, the company was looking for a new base. This is because they searched a new training center to engage in Southeast Asian market, especially in Spice Trade, and also a new base as a port of call for British shipping between India and China to increase trade with Cantonese. The new base as a British naval base following Anglo-French wars in India and nearby areas, Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean.
Thai-Malaysian relations began even before the foundation of the Malacca Sultanate in the early 15th century. The relations overcame a British colonial interregnum of 150 years, during which the four of northern Malay states of Kedah, Perlis, Kelantan and Terengganu were not under colonial rule, and the bitterness engendered by the cession in 1909 of these four northern states. It has three main phases: the traditional phase, the bunga emas and the bunga perak phase. Second, there was the colonial phase, followed by the post-independence phase. Geopolitical location intertwined socio-cultural elements, political tradition, and human factors are the fundamental elements that have distinguished Thai-Malaysian relations from other political and diplomatic ties. First, the bunga emas and bunga perak phase. It was a tribute sent every 3 years to the King of Siam, Ayutthaya, by the northern Malay states of Kedah, Terengganu, Kelantan, and Patani. There are several supposed origins and reasons for the establishment of the tradition. It was sent as a toy for a newborn Thai prince who was the grandson of Sultan Kedah himself. These gifts from the sultans to the king were probably laden with deep political and misunderstanding. While the King of Siam would consider them as a recognition of suzerainty over the Malay sultanates, the sultans would simply regard them as a token of friendship. The last bunga emas from Kedah to the King of Siam was sent in 1906. 3 years later, another bunga emas was ready to be sent. In March 1909, however, before it could be sent to Siam, Britain and Siam signed a treaty in which the sovereignty of the northern sultanates of Malaya was to be transferred to Britain, and it was called Anglo-Siamese Treaty. In the colonial phase, King Mongkut introduced a policy of nurturing close personal contacts between Bangkok and the Malay ruling class, encouraging them to visit Bangkok and cultivate close personal relationships with their Thai counterparts. Sultan Ahmad and Chulalongkorn both maintained personal contact with the Siamese Malay tributaries, which enabled Bangkok to blunt Singapore's aggressive diplomacy and gauge Malay sentiments. Cultivating Thai-Malay personal relations during the colonial period strengthened the traditional bonds between the Thai suzerain and the Malay tributary rulers, making Bangkok-Kelantan relations solid and harmonious. Other than that, Singapore and the British colonial administration in the Malay Peninsula and the Colonial Office in London attempted to undermine Siam's presence in the Malay Peninsula, portraying Siamese relations as archaic, pretentious, and unsympathetic to Malay wishes and interests. The Siam-Kedah axis was an example of near-ideal tributary relations, with the Kedah ruling house being the beneficiary of Siam's reformed tributary system. Siam's influence in the Malay Peninsula was declining, and tributary relations were not able to cope with rapid socio-political changes. Then, the advisory system replaced tributary relations between Siam and its Malay tributaries in 1902, mirroring British colonial rule in the Malay Peninsula. In the modern phase, Kedah has a special place in Thai-Malay relations, having experienced both harsh and benign aspects of the Siamese relationship. It was invaded by Siamese forces and ruled by the Siamese authorities, and its rulers were singled out as the most honored and favored by the King of Siam. Kedah rulers and Siamese compromise provided strong foundations for post-1842 relations, even after Siam ceded the Malay tributaries. Kedah's cession of Siamese rights to the British was a bitter pill, but close family ties, socio-cultural bonds, and personal preferences helped bridge the gap in official Thai-Malay relations until Malaya's independence. British colonial rule was less attractive to Kedah due to its lack of educational opportunities for young princes, which could have boosted Bangkok's attractiveness to Singapore. Kedah-Siam relations flourished during the interregnum years, culminating in the election of Tunku Abdul Rahman as the Chief Minister of Malaya in 1955. The fundamental elements that have distinguished Thai-Malay relations is the geopolitical setting. The Siamese ruling elite believed that for the security and survival of Siam's dominant position on mainland Southeast Asia, the country had to ensure friendly cooperation. Thai leaders played a major role in the affairs of all the Malay sultanates, most of which were marked by the traditional diplomatic relations involving the presentation of bunga mas and bunga perak. Next is intertwined socio-cultural development. Socio-cultural aspects played a subtle role in the development of Thai-Malay relations. The history of the upper and lower parts of the Malay Peninsula shared similar historical and socio-cultural experience, with indigenous animism followed by Hindu Buddhism and Islam. Politically, the region experienced intra-regional power struggles throughout the first 18th centuries. Thai-Malay relations have been shaped by socio-cultural bonds and family ties. For politics, Ayutthaya re-established its militarily powerful and politically superior position within the Malay Peninsula, imposing the bunga mas and bunga perak as the benchmark of acceptable political relations. British colonial rule in the Malay Peninsula led to the adoption of the advisory system in all Siamese Malay dependencies except Terengganu. Lastly is the human factor. The most important details of Thai-Malaysian special relations are the close personal links cultivated through long years of living in close proximity to each other. Malaysia's first Prime Minister had strong blood ties with Thailand, and other distinguished Malaysians had special family links with Thailand. These ties have bridged mutual differences, frustrations, and unhappiness, and have strengthened the foundations on which modern Thai-Malaysian relations are built. In conclusion, it can't be denied that the British Empire stole Malaya's natural resources to generate their own economy at the expense of the labour workforce of the Chinese and Indian immigrants. To prevent unity, they separate the settlements of the three races. The removal of the Malay rulers' authority in the nation was primarily accomplished by the British Empire. However, the British ruled the evolutionist Malaya, set it up for independence, and introduced important ideas that would later form the basis of the nation's educational system. And that's all from our group. Thank you.